I think the changing role is much more around CIOs now taking that sort of give back of time, that reduced direct operational responsibility, and leveraging it to get closer to customers, get closer to revenue, and figuring out how to add more value back to your business.
Technology is transforming how we think, how we lead, and how we win. From Intervision, this is Status Go, the show helping IT leaders move beyond the status quo, master their craft, and propel their IT vision. Welcome to Status Go. I'm your host, Jeff Tunn. You've heard me say several times on these podcast episodes that tech is changing, business is changing, work itself is changing at an incredible pace. This means that the role of CIO must change. The CIO himself or herself must change. Our guest today has been a leading voice of change for the CIO role throughout his career. Paul Chapman has been CIO for VMware, HP Software, and now has been at Box for 4 years. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it.
So glad you could join us for today's conversation, Paul. I want to pick up where we left off the last time. So I interviewed you 3 years ago for a blog series I was doing for Intel's IT Peer Network. And the blog series was Path to CIO. And we wrapped up that conversation with some words of advice for the CIO of the future or the aspiring CIO. And I'll summarize your points for you. You made the point that the CIO should put his or her resume in her drawer, and in 5 years, and we'll call it 3 years since we talked 3 years ago, would it have changed in any substantial way? And then your next piece of advice was don't run away, run towards a challenge. And then I loved the third piece, which was patience, because given your martial arts background, you told the story that the black belt is a dirty white belt from so much practice and training. So, Paul, I'm going to put you on the spot here and say, okay, 3 years have passed since that blog post. What's changed for Paul Chapman?
That's a trip down memory lane now when we talk. And actually, it's still relevant. I still use the same call it advice if you want to call it that. And if we start with the resume in the drawer, the one thing that was changed, I would say, your resume in box versus in a drawer.
That's right. Yeah.
But the analogy still applies, and that's really around. As you think about career, if you do put your resume in a drawer and you take it out in a year from now or 2 years from now or 5 years from now, if nothing has materially changed, then you've done nothing towards increasing your future state opportunities. Your personal market cap has not increased. And sometimes that's not just doesn't necessarily just show up on a resume. It could also be, your building of your external network and your connections and relationships externally as well is also an investment in that, in your future career. So the thing that I think is probably changed the most in that amount of time is, I think when we first spoke about this, I was reasonably new to Box, and we talked about the transition from more of a sort of traditional legacy type environment with a lot of on-prem infrastructure and technical debt, and now at a born in the cloud, grown up digital company. And some of the things that are different, and we can touch on those in just a few, but certainly I learned a lot about being at a company that's born in the cloud, grown up digital, doesn't have a lot of sort of entrenched inertia and operational overhead that some of the sort of more legacy companies do, and what are the advantages that brings to you.
So you have a cush job now. Is that what you're saying?
I don't know if there's I don't think there's, as a CIO, I'm not sure we signed up for cush.
Yeah, I don't think so either, man.
Yeah, haven't found it yet.
So I listened to, you were on Tim Crawford's podcast, CIO in the Know, a few episodes back. And in that, you had this great quote: workplace used to be a place you went, and now it is a state of mind. Talk to us a little bit about that and how work has changed, and you're a part of a company that was born digital, born in the cloud. You're probably seeing some of those changes in the workplace before several others, many of the rest of us.
I think some of this is also driven by the changing demographic of the workforce as well. When you think about new style of employee or new style of worker, one that has grown up as a digital native. Of course, they don't call themselves digital natives. I often joke, my kids don't say, "Hey, I'm a digital native, Dad," or "Hey, look at my, or look at my digital pictures." It just is, right? I think
Right,
may have
right.
mentioned before, someone said to me once before, "How do you describe technology?" And I said, "Well, I don't really have the perfect description." I said, "But the best one I've ever heard was technology was anything that was invented after you were born." And so
Ah,
so now, as we have a much more sort of digital native workforce, grown up, being educated with consumer technology and the likes of Apple and Google and so on in the workforce now, with its entirely different set of expectations and certainly new style of employee, new style of worker, new style of workplace. Like I said, work used to be a place you used to go to. Now it's much more of a state of mind, and much more open, social, collaborative. And in order to support that environment, you need a new style of IT. And in fact, I actually would go one step further, that in order to attract the new workforce and in order to retain talent, you actually have to provide an environment that supports this new way of working.
so you talked a little bit in your blog. So you wrote a blog post, VP of Workplace Productivity, and I know you made that title up, but it really emphasizes the points you were just making, right? That you need to be intentional about building that environment, the workplace of today, the workplace of the future.
Yeah, what I noticed or noted, I should say, as part of, and this really came about when we built a new headquarters, and really thinking through the design of what the new headquarters look like, and how do we build, how do we create, how do we enable an environment that allows our employees to be their most productive? How do we take the work out of work? How do we create frictionless experiences for our employees so that they can be their most productive? Sort of get IT out of the way, so to speak. And
Yeah.
in thinking through that, it also requires this combination of employee, sort of thinking through the employee productivity experience, along with the experience of cultural aspects of your organization. How do thinking about the culture that you want to grow and build inside the organization, and then of course the workplace environment itself from a facilities or physical perspective. And so we spent a lot of time with our people organization, the person who's responsible for growing our culture and so on, and then also technology, and then the physical facilities and workplace services side of things. And that's where we really came to sort of envision the vice president of workplace productivity.
Are there one or two things that you did there at Box with the new headquarters that you can share with our audience without giving away any of your secret sauce? I wouldn't want you to do that, but are there some concrete things that you can give the audience of what you did?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think there's anything that's secret sauce per se. I think it's, is one of the things I really enjoy about, sort of being a technology leader is that you get to connect and share and collaborate with other technology leaders from all
Hmm.
different other types of companies. And a lot of what we're doing, we deal with sort of the same complexities and challenges as one another. And, we're certainly willing to share and collaborate on our different perspectives and insights. I mean, I'm sure there's some specifics around uh, uh, each organization that doesn't make sense to share. But when it comes to, I think a lot of how do you make your employees productive and how do you think through that, I think there's a lot of sharing that we can do there and experiences learned. Certainly we focus a lot at Box on best of breed. How do we how
Hmm.
do we build a reference architecture, whether that's for our business processes or our workplace productivity, that really is built around best of breed capabilities? We think about the services of innovation today and how do we bring services of innovation together in a very interoperable way, and how do we bring that innovation into our organization. And it does often take a number of different services coming together to create those sort of frictionless experiences. So something a little bit more tangible, maybe something that's simple to share would be maybe our conference room experience. We have no single person offices in our working spaces. So that means that conference rooms are at a premium, and we actually have about a 95 plus percent occupancy rate most of the time in our office space, and that accounts for all of our
Wow.
offices, whether that's our office in Austin, New York, or San Francisco, or Redwood City, California. And so one of the things that we did was we integrated our calendaring environment with our conference room booking, and it's all done through iPads. And in fact, you can do it on a mobile app. You can book a conference room. In fact, we have proximity sensors throughout our entire building, and you can actually get turn by turn navigation directions to the conference room if you book on the app. So you have the little blue dot will tell you, take a left here, take a right in 15 feet, and navigate you to the conference room you just booked. But one of the things that we were able to do with this type of technology was we're able to actually look at utilization rates. And what we found was that we required people to check into their conference room when they entered. And we found that if somebody was going to be a no-show and had not checked in, then we effectively returned that conference room back to the pool of available conference rooms.
Ah,
And we had about a reclaim rate of about 17%, which was pretty decent.
yeah,
But we
yeah.
had a hypothesis that 10 minutes might have been a little bit too long, and we changed that to 8 minutes, and we had a reclaim rate of 20%. And so what we're learning is that if you have the right technology that can give you the right sort of forensics and data points or intelligence, you can start to tune the environment to actually get more efficiency or out of the environment. So in this case, we increased our availability of conference rooms. As an example, we also have this term called zombie rooms. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but
No, not
yeah,
that's
what
a new
it what
one.
it what it is you'll have a conference room as an example that's booked for a certain call it cadence of meetings, a regular sort of one-on-one
Hmm.
or a team meeting or something along those lines. And after a while, that meeting may be abandoned for whatever reason, person left the company, something like that, and it sits out there as a zombie room, and it's effectively hogging space on
Yeah.
the availability. And so what happens or what was happening was after five no shows, we would actually delete the meeting from the calendar and free it back up. We changed that to three no shows. And of course, we certainly would know if that had an impact because there's never a shortage of people wanting to complain about tech. So if there's no noise, then
Right, right.
definitely no news is good news. And we actually did that. We changed it to three. We send a warning out after two no shows. And again, what we found is that this is around optimizing the workplace, optimizing the efficiency of our space, and
Yeah,
so on. And,
yeah.
and, and interestingly, or contrastingly, I should say, we actually introduced Alexa devices onto one floor of our building for voice interaction with our conference room. So you could walk into the conference room and say, Alexa, check me in. Alexa, check me out. Alexa, find me a room. Alexa, we built about 11 different skills. But what we found
Okay.
was, though, the employee adoption of using the Alexa was very, very low, almost to the point of where we would find them often unplugged.
Oh, wow.
And so you have this sort of, people are very happy, I think, ordering whether it's dog food or dish soap on at home on their Alexa or Google device. But in the office, there's something about having a listening device in a meeting that people are very uncomfortable with. Um,
Well, yeah,
yeah,
I didn't take it
yeah.
that there, but yeah, you're right.
Well,
You're
you
right.
can you can mute these devices, and I'm sure there's some skeptics that say, "Is it really muted?" So let's unplug it.
Yeah.
But this is the type of environment we're in. It's allowing us to experiment. It's allowing us to bring new and different types of technologies into the environment, and allowing us to evolve to the way that we work, to look for ways to tune, to create efficiencies. And we've got a lot of examples like that. Those are just a few simple ones.
Well, and you talk a lot about tuning efficiencies, and that's I think that's a great benefit to that. But it's also got to be helping the employees because the angst over finding a conference room can be, it can ruin your day sometimes. You're trying to find a room so hard. And if you're able to return so much inventory, so to speak, I would think that would also reduce employee angst somewhat.
That's it. You nailed it. And this is one example of one area that we've spent some time on, trying to take friction out, trying to take the work out of work, trying to take the angst out, so that people, and of course, you know, 99.9% of the population did not know that we went from five no shows to three no shows, or we went
Right.
from 10 minutes to 8 minutes, and created more, sort of more inventory, as a good term, I guess. And that's the whole point. It's like, how do we work behind the scenes to monitor what's going on, use data, and to tune the environment so that we take, friction, angst, out of the workplace.
One of the things you mentioned a minute ago, Paul, was one of the things that you like about being a CIO, being involved in tech, is the tech community itself is very collegial, open to sharing ideas and helping each other solve problems. You mentioned on Tim Crawford's podcast, the Future of Work Council. Can you tell our audience a little bit about what that is in case someone would like to get involved either without council or perhaps start one in their city?
Yeah, one of the things we recognized at Box is, we have a significant customer base, right? We're over 90,000 plus customers. And when we look at other companies or other technology providers that are also providing best of breed services, whereas we do that for content, there are others, maybe it's Slack for messaging, or it's Zoom for video conferencing, or whatever it might be. As we look across the best of breed ecosystem for these services of innovation, and we start to see other companies that are common to our customer base. We share a lot of the same customers, and we hear a lot of the same sort of experiences and so on. And we can touch on this in just a moment when we talk about the future of work. But we definitely see some common data points around how organizations are shifting, as they shift to a
Hmm.
digital workplace, as they think about redesigning their business model, their operating model, and so on. And we've certainly identified that technology and culture are inextricably linked. And understanding what does sort of a digital culture look like, and what does a modern technology stack look like to support that. And so what we did is we formed a Future of Work Council, and we brought together some common customers, large customers, large legacy customers born way in the last century, some new companies or newer companies, and shared these sets of experiences around what are the biggest challenges. And interestingly, we've certainly found that technology, in the most part, is outstripped and outpace the ability for most organizations to keep up. And
Yeah.
technology is an enabler to transformation, but it's not what drives transformation. We have this saying at Box, it's not about rewriting your software, it's about rewriting your company. And you really have to look at, uh, you know, business model, operating model, culture. And so we spend a lot of time in this Future of Work Council talking about how technology and culture are inextricably linked. And if you don't have a culture that matches a modern way of, or you want to transition to a modern way of working, but you don't have a culture that's adaptive for that, then unfortunately it makes it for a very painful transition, if not impossible.
Yeah. So this council is made up of tech companies and some of your customers and clients?
It's actually a few tech companies from the Bay Area that we've sort of like the cohort that
Okay.
jointly brings together customers that we share. We
Yeah.
share common customers, and then we bring them together, and then we share and collaborate on sort of what does the future of work look like.
Yeah, that is a great concept. I think other cities around the country could model that as well, and you get that very interesting cross section of sharing, not only across various tech companies, but across different industries of the customers that you bring in. I think that would be incredibly beneficial.
Yeah, the reason I really like it is because I think it starts to address the how part. I think a lot of organizations and smart people figure out what they need to do and why they need to do it, and what that future looks like for them, and why they need to invest to get there. But then the rubber sort of really hits the road when you start to think through how are we going to get there. And a lot of the time, as I said before, the technology is proven to not be the hardest part. Now, there's investment and there's time and effort, don't get me wrong, in replatforming or standing up new services and integrating and things like that. But the bigger challenge tends to be sort of the cultural aspects of change. I don't know if I mentioned this 3 years ago, but I always used to say, or still say actually, that change is the enemy of the competent.
Yes, yes.
Because
I
it's
think you
where
did a presentation on that, or a blog on that a few years ago. Yeah, yeah,
I may have, and it's not sort of being disrespectful. It's just that very competent people don't like change because it disrupts the value that they bring to an organization. And when you try to change something that's going to disrupt the value you bring to the organization, that's an enemy to the value you bring. And so that becomes resistance. And if you don't figure out how to address resistance in advance of embarking upon some transformation, you're going to inevitably run into that resistance as part of the transformation,
hmm
and thereby making the transformation or transformation that much harder.
yeah, yeah. You've talked some today about this ecosystem of partners. That as CIO, that's one of the strategies that you're implementing. Can you talk a little bit more about your approach with that ecosystem of providers?
Yeah. So one of the things that, and this is sort of was one of those sort of 3 years on type of things that I've learned, is that businesses need to operate faster than ever. And our customers, our partners, they all expect frictionless experiences. We have this reliance on external partners and so on. And you think about boundaries or lack thereof today. We're in a globally connected world, mobile ubiquity, access to
Yep.
almost infinite compute. Disruption is dangerous, but the disruptions we're seeing today are happening faster than ever. And so, how do we have an environment that, or an architecture that is built for speed and agility and flexibility, and having been in environments that built massive complex architectures at a certain point in time, that were that was the design of the day, that was the way you built systems or
Right,
services.
right.
And inevitably what you did is you, in a stepwise linear way, evolved those architectures to continue to add new capabilities. But the problem is that they were built in a way that doesn't allow for agility, didn't allow for speed, and so everything sort of slowed down. And now the business was outpacing the ability for IT to keep up. And in today's modern reference architecture that's built on sort of a platform economy, open API environment, the ability to bring together services in a cloud world, so you can, the speed with which you can do that, the freedom from infrastructure, the sort of federating out of sort of the direct responsibility for scalability, reliability, etc., is, and then of course each service that you're investing in and bringing into your environment is maniacally focused on being the best at what they do,
Right, right.
and innovating around their particular space. And as the owner of that architecture, you get to bring that innovation into your environment very, very rapidly, almost to the point now where the technology has, or the innovation has outstripped the ability for the organization to keep up, which gets IT out of the way. We're not behind
hmm
anymore, we're in front. And so now the challenge is the pace of change that the organization has the ability to absorb. Certainly at a
Right.
company like Box, where you have like I said, a more modern, forward-thinking, innovative culture, the appetite for accelerated change is pretty high. So that allows us to move faster.
When you have this ecosystem of partners, these best of breed partners, who's orchestrating them to work together? Are you doing that, or are you expecting your partners to bring a solution that blends together multiple platforms, if you will?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's something that, if the answer to that question is something that is painful and complex for people to do, I'm fearful that we would ultimately end up back with a sort of monolithic stack in the cloud, so to speak, that's managed
Yeah,
by
yeah,
one vendor, and then you lose the innovation and everything else that's going on in benefits that you get from that space. So inevitably, it is incumbent upon the best of breed service providers to make sure that they can interoperate with each other as
yeah,
seamlessly as possible. And we're finding that. I think in order to stay relevant and compete, you have to have this open environment that allows others that you can partner with, that allow for seamless native connectivity to your platform. Because if that becomes a source of friction, becomes complex, or something that lacks capability that you need, then ultimately you're going to start to gravitate towards something that is already pre-built. And what we're also
right,
finding, though, is that because in the most part, when we say best of breed, there's typically a best of breed, call it the number one or the number two in most spaces. And
right.
beyond that, I don't know if I need to go to whoever, whether it's a front office or a back office or it's an end user service type of capability or workplace type of service. I'm going to go with the number one or number two in the most part anyway. And
Yeah, yeah.
and most of the number one and number two providers have actually already know who the other number one or number two is in the other areas, and they're partnering very well together to make sure that you have that connectivity. And also, I'm finding in some of the cloud to cloud integration brokers that are out there, the new emerging ones, that when it comes to cloud, they're already pre-building integration connectivity between, because they know what the endpoints are and they know what the starting points are. So that's it's actually
Yeah,
working
yeah,
out
yeah.
so far so good on that one. I hope it continues to stay that way.
Yeah, I do too. As we talk about the future, I think that is the future of these ecosystems of partners working together. Paul, this has been fantastic. I'd like to wrap up today in the same way we wrapped up the interview for the Path to CIO, and a look to the future. What does the role of CIO look like 3 years from now, 5 years from now? And what should CIOs of today or CIOs of tomorrow be working on from a skill set perspective to be ready for that?
Okay, so the crystal ball type of question. Well, hopefully it won't.
Absolutely. Well, you were spot on 3 years ago, man.
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping it's not going to be 3 years until we connect again.
I hope so as well.
Yeah, and of course, there's no exact science to this, but I'll give you my perspective. It's worth what you paid for it. So
Exactly.
I think that, as you mentioned this at the very beginning, sort of changing role of CIO, and I think that if you're a technology professional, you have to constantly reinvent yourself to stay relevant anyway. It's never boring. It's taxing, but not boring. And I was a COBOL programmer in 1987. If I hadn't reinvented myself many times over and forgotten about more than I've ever learned, then I wouldn't be here today.
Exactly.
But what I'm really experiencing and seeing evolve today is, as you start to reduce the what I would say, the operational footprint that most CIOs have had to manage in the past, as you start to have more freedom from sort of large scale infrastructure, more things moving to cloud based services, what you're really seeing is this shift of time away from running, we call it run the business, keeping the lights on.
Yep.
Um, you're getting back the gift of time with which to go focus on how to change the business, scale the business. And that shift of time is really, really important. And I think there may have been this little fear before that, oh dear, if my footprint shrinks, does that mean I'm going to become less valuable to the organization? And that's where I think the changing role comes in, because now you can use that give back to go focus on things that add higher value to your business and to your organization, whatever that might be for the industry that you're in. And I think this is what's allowing CIOs now to take a more strategic and active part in how you grow the business, how you scale the business, how you get closer to customers, how you get closer to revenue. And those are much more sort of enjoyable parts of your role than, how do we make sure we've got our databases up and running and backed up and there's a failover, all those sort of operational things.
Yeah.
So I think the changing role is much more around CIOs now taking that sort of give back of time, that reduced direct operational responsibility, and leveraging it to get closer to customers, get closer to revenue, and figuring out how to add more value back to your business.
So if you were in a one-on-one conversation with our listeners, one of our CIO listeners, what's the one thing you would tell them to go do tomorrow?
Okay. I would say, and this is making the presumption they haven't done this already, is I would go out to the future, and it turns out to be 3 years because I like 3 years. I think beyond that is too long. I would go out to the future, 3 years, and I would start with a clean sheet and an unconstrained view and build, what does my IT reference architecture look like? What does my technology architecture look like to support the business in 3 years from now? And then I would come back to today and I would have a set of guiding principles that for every decision I make going forward now and every investment decision I make going forward now, it's taking me a step closer towards that where I want to be in 3 years from now. And then it removes the sort of decision by decision aspects. Each one, it's like, we're going to move email to the cloud, or we're going to move this. It gets you away from talking about each individual change as an investment and its own individual ROI, because you're building towards a future state that has been bought into by your organization.
Beautiful. I love that advice, Paul. Thank you so much. And thank you for taking the time to be on our show this week with us. The conversation has been great. I promise it will not be 3 years before we talk again. I hope to get on your calendar this summer for dinner, perhaps, or maybe even a tour of your offices there at Box. Would love to do that.
That would be great, and I'd be happy to host you.
For our listeners out there, if you have a question or want to learn more, go to intervision.com. The show notes will provide links and contact information. This is Jeff Tunn for Paul Chapman. Thank you very much for listening.
You've been listening to the Status Go podcast. You can subscribe on iTunes or get more information at intervision.com. If you'd like to contribute to the conversation, find Intervision on Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter. Thank you for listening. Until next time.